Good morning. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar to commemorate 77 years of Israel's ongoing Nakba or catastrophe against the Palestinian people. My name is Josh Rubner. I'm the policy director of the IMEU Policy Project. I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning, and a huge thanks to our expert panelists who are joining us to talk about the Nakba, to talk about the ongoing nature of the catastrophe that Israel is inflicting on the Palestinian people, and for all of you joining to learn what you can do to support Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib's historic reintroduction of her resolution to commemorate the Nakba and also to end ongoing U.S. complicity in this tragedy. Of course, our subject takes on much greater gravity in light of the situation on the ground as we see Israel continuing its ongoing genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, including forced starvation and potential massive ethnic cleansing that's already been greenlit by the Trump administration, potentially forcibly displacing more than 2 million Palestinians beyond their homeland, outside of the boundaries of Palestine. So to shed light on the historical and contemporary nature of the Nakba and the ongoing Nakba against the Palestinian people, we're joined today by two expert academics, and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib will be joining us later to talk about her resolution. So I'm going to introduce the speakers first, and then we'll turn it over to them to give 10-minute overviews. Representative Rashida Tlaib is a mother fighting for justice for all. She's a Detroit native of Palestinian heritage, a progressive leader, mother, daughter, friend, and community advocate. Born to immigrant parents, she built a career as a public interest attorney, challenging corporate abuses and protecting our civil rights. Rashida made history in 2008 by becoming the first Muslim woman to ever serve in the Michigan legislature, and then again in 2019, becoming one of the two first Muslim women in Congress. As a congresswoman, Rashida has fought relentlessly for the 12th District of Michigan and vulnerable communities around the country, fighting against corporate greed and advocating for clean air and water, social justice, ending poverty, strengthening public education, and more. In 2022, she founded the Get the Lead Out Caucus to fight to ensure that every lead pipe in America is replaced so that everyone has safe and clean drinking water. She also founded the Mamas Caucus to advocate for mothers of color and working families and make sure that all mothers have a seat at the table where policy decisions are made. Rashida will not give up the fight until every person has an equitable opportunity to thrive. Professor Maha Nassar is Associate Professor of Modern Middle East History and Islamic Studies at the University of Arizona. She's a cultural and intellectual historian of the 20th century Arab world with a focus on Palestinian history. Her research traces global circulations of social, political, and cultural identities, and she holds a PhD in Near Eastern languages and civilizations from the University of Chicago. Her first book, Brothers Apart: Palestinian Citizens of Israel and the Arab World, examines how Palestinian cultural producers in Israel during the 1950s and 60s positioned themselves within an Arab world and Third World social, cultural, and intellectual milieu that extends far beyond the confines of the Israeli nation-state. By mapping the strategies they deployed, her book demonstrates the importance of Arabic newspapers and literary journals in traversing national boundaries and in creating transnational and transregional communities of solidarity. In 2018, Brothers Apart received a Palestine Book Award for academic titles. Professor Ilan Pappé is the director of the European Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter. Professor Pappé got his BA degree from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in 1979 and his PhD from the University of Oxford in 1984. He founded and directed the Academic Institute for Peace in Givat Chavivat, Israel between 1992 and 2000, and he was the chair of the Emil Tuma Institute for Palestine Studies in Haifa between 2000 and 2006. Professor Pappé was a senior lecturer in the Department of Middle Eastern History and Political Science at Haifa University, Israel between 1984 and 2006. He was appointed as chair of the Department of History at University of Exeter in 2007 to 2009. And his research focuses on the modern history of the Middle East, and in particular, the history of Israel and Palestine. He has also written on multiculturalism, critical discourse analysis, and on power and knowledge in general. Among his many books are The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, Gaza in Crisis, and A History of Modern Palestine. Thank you both for joining us. Thank you also to Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib for joining us as well. I'm actually going to turn the floor over to Congresswoman Tlaib first to talk about her reintroduction of her historic resolution to commemorate the Nakba.
Oh, thank you so much, Josh. Thank you so much to everyone that is, part of this movement into making sure that, again, it's not controversial to say Palestinians deserve to live and Palestinian children deserve to grow old. I'm, as you know, the only Palestinian American right now serving in Congress. I hope that changes soon, but also been leading this, kind of truth-telling for many of my colleagues to understand why it's important to acknowledge the history of the Palestinian people and the Nakba. More and more of my colleagues are asking me what that means. What is the Nakba? Thank you to IMEU consistently always being on top of it and being able to for me to be able to forward the information to everyone. But this historic Nakba resolution, this is our third time introducing it. And we are now have more people coming on board and supporting it. But it's a call to end the ethnic cleansing, acknowledging what has happened in the trauma and the forced displacement, but also the continued ethnic cleansing. It also really leans in on the Palestinian refugee rights, the right to return, and really emphasizes the importance, as we know, of complying with international law, acknowledging that. Josh, for everyone, just know this all came about because a colleague of mine continued to come up to me, dismayed by maybe tweets, speeches on the floor, saying, "You don't understand the history," to me. And it wasn't just her, but a number of others would always start that off. And if you're Palestinian or an advocate for Palestinian human rights, you've heard that before. And so without even talking to any groups, I said, I want to introduce the Nakba resolution. The first time we ever introduced it, boy, folks were like just policing and making false claims of what it means. But it was important to me to show that my ancestors, my Siti, my Sidi, my Khali, everyone lived that history that they claim again, we know that has been whitewashed in regards to the Palestinian people. I know for me here in Congress, acknowledging that history and the role that our country has had back then and now is critical. And understanding that the dehumanization of the Palestinian people did not start at the beginning of this genocide in Gaza. It existed before I even got to Congress, and many of us felt it. When I first got elected, I remember my cousin calling me and saying, "I can't believe you won. We thought everybody in America wanted us to die." And it broke my heart. And if anything that we can do, the simplest of just putting into the congressional record a resolution acknowledging our history, acknowledging the role of our country in the continuation of the Nakba. I said in the floor speech a few minutes ago how for many Palestinians, they told us the Nakba never ended. The Nakba never ended. And we know by not only in the images of Gaza, but in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, the Nakba never ended. And so again, appreciate the incredible partnership and the professors, everyone that has been leaning in on this. I appreciate that. And just know this year, again, we've gotten a few more congressional members supporting and co-leading this fight. Again, I think it's now more than ever an important tool to organize around as we try to free the Palestinian people. That I yield back to you, Josh.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Tlaib, for this hugely important historic resolution that you've just reintroduced. I want to let everyone know that the resolution now has a number. It's H.Res 409. And we're going to put a link in the chat to where you can go on our website to take action to get your representative to co-sponsor this historic resolution. And in addition to thanking the Congresswoman for reintroducing this resolution, I also want to give a shout out to all 8 of the original co-sponsors of this resolution: Representative Andre Carson of Indiana, Representative Summer Lee of Pennsylvania, Representative Ocasio-Cortez of New York, Representative Omar of Minnesota, Representative Presley of Massachusetts, Representative Ramirez of Illinois, Representative Simon of California, and Representative Watson Coleman of New Jersey. If any of those are your members of Congress, be sure to pick up the phone right after this webinar ends and thank them for being an original co-sponsor of this important resolution. And I also want to thank all of the organizations that are co-sponsoring this webinar today: American Friends Service Committee, Americans for Justice in Palestine Action, American Muslims for Palestine, the Friends Committee on National Legislation, If Not Now, and U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights Action. And with that, I want to turn the floor over to Professor Nassar.
Thank you so much, Josh and Congresswoman Tlaib. It's an honor to meet you. You are an inspiration to Palestinian Americans, including myself, my family, my community, and those all over the country. I wanted to talk a little bit about what you said a moment ago, this idea that somehow we Palestinians don't know our history, that we don't understand our history, and what that's about. And I think it's precisely one of those reasons why I became a professional historian. I became a professor of history, is because of all of these ongoing claims that Palestinian history is somehow not known. So there's this idea that's really popular in the U.S. You hear it in the halls of Congress, on cable news shows, that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is simply a conflict between 2 national groups fighting over the same land. And that if both sides would just compromise a little bit, if moderates on both sides would take the lead, if they would marginalize the extremists on both sides, then we could have peace and an end to the quote-unquote conflict. But here's the catch, is that the conflict framing assumes that both sides, both Israelis and Palestinians, have equal amounts of power, have equal levers, have equal access to the decision makers in the region and around the world. But the fact is they don't. When Israel was created in 1948, over 750,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes. That was the vast majority of Palestinians who were living in what became the State of Israel. That's what we often refer to as the 1948 Nakba. The ongoing Nakba refers to Israel's continued refusal and removal for the past 77 years, continued removal of Palestinians, and continued refusal to allow those refugees who had been expelled in 1948 and their descendants to return to their lands. Today, Jewish Israelis are living in the homes and on the lands of Palestinians while they continue to languish in refugee camps, sometimes only a few miles away, and longing to return. So how does this continue for 77 years? How are people kept away from their homeland, from their villages, for over 7 decades? And the simple answer is by force. And those mechanisms of force that forcibly expelled Palestinians from their land in 1948, and the mechanisms that continue to forcibly keep them off their land and deny their right of return, is settler colonialism. And so, quick definition. So settler colonialism is the process by which a native population is forcibly removed from their land and replaced by settlers who come in and settle on that land. It's a form of control over land, labor, and resources. Now, we have to also remember that under international law, when a population is forced from their homes or from their land, even during wartime, they have a right to return once that war is over. But Israel has prevented Palestinians from returning to their homes in order to maintain a Jewish demographic majority. That's settler colonialism. Now, I also really think it's important to stress, in the interest of history, that determining who is a settler and who is a native is not about identity. It's not about religion. It's not about ancestry. And it's definitely not about who claims that they were, quote unquote, here first. It's not about who is here first, but it's about who benefits from these policies and structures that benefit one group of people and that harm another. And in the case of Israel-Palestine, the answer is clear. Israelis benefit, Palestinians are harmed. And I'll give you just one example. In 1950, Israel passed the absentee property law. This law allowed the Israeli state to take over property belonging to Palestinians who had fled or were expelled during the 1948 Nakba. Palestinian land was taken by force and then given by law, through this law, to Israeli individuals and institutions. And the institutions, like the Jewish National Fund, for example, only allowed that land to be bought, rented, or distributed to Jewish Israelis. And so what that means is that a Palestinian today, in 2025, even if they're an Israeli citizen, and even if they have the land deeds to their original homes and lands from before 1948, if they take that to an Israeli court, they can't get their land back. That's settler colonialism. So here's the thing, is that settler colonialism, we talk about it as a mechanism, as a structure that privileges one group of people over another. And your relationship to that structure determines whether or not you're a settler or a native. So again, it's not about ancestry or identity, but it's about a relationship to a structure of oppression. So that's the Nakba, the ongoing Nakba, and its relationship to settler colonialism. But here's the other thing, and this is the great irony, but also the great triumph, I would say, of the Palestinian people. And that is, it's precisely because of the ongoing Nakba that the Palestinian cause is still alive. The assumption that a lot of early Israeli leaders and a lot of early Western leaders had was that the Palestinian refugees could just be settled in other Arab lands, that the old would die, the young would forget, and there'd be a population exchange, and everything would be settled. But as we know, the Palestinian refugees refused to give up on their right to return to their ancestral lands, and they refused to forget. So generation after generation, including ours, and including our children, and including the young people that we've been seeing galvanizing around the country and around the world, generation after generation of Palestinians have carried Palestine with them in their hearts, no matter where they go. And that's what we mean when we talk about this idea of sumud, or steadfastness. So much of that sumud is simply existing in the world as a Palestinian, when so much of the world is hostile to our very being. When Congresswoman Tlaib walks through Congress and people tell her to check her history, or when so-called experts say with a straight face that there's no such thing as Palestinians, they don't even exist. And so in that world where our very existence is deemed as somehow hostile or threatening, our very existence, our willingness to say, I am a Palestinian, I come from Palestine, that itself is a form of sumud and a way of carrying forth and saying we will not be defeated by this ongoing Nakba. And we also look for each other, we look for community. So when any Palestinian meets any other Palestinian anywhere in the world, one of the first questions we're going to ask each other is, what balad are you from? What town or village do your ancestors come from? Even if you've never stepped foot in it, even if you've never been there. So my father was born in Barbara, in the south of Palestine, near the Mediterranean coast. My mom was born in the city of Jaffa before 1948. Both of them were forced from their homes as children in 1948. When I first heard about Congresswoman Tlaib running for office, and I heard she was Palestinian American, one of the first things I did is Google where she's from. Because she mentioned her grandmother. I'm like, oh, where's her grandmother? And I learned she was from Beit Ar el Fawqa. I'm like, oh, okay. That's near Ramallah. That's in the West Bank. A lot of the Chicago Palestinians I know are from that area as well. When we do that, we're doing three things. Palestinians are establishing a personal connection with someone who understands what they're going through. They're also building Palestinian community. And I think also importantly and often overlooked is the fact that when we're doing that, we are reinforcing a collective memory and shared geography of Palestine. We are in our mental maps placing where we're from, where our ancestors are from, even if we've never been there. And that shared collective geography extends from, say it with me, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, from the river to the sea. So no matter where we are in the world, we still carry Palestine in our hearts. And so that's why I think this resolution is so important. It draws our attention to the fact that Palestinians are still being denied their connection to their homeland, that Palestinians are still not free to live in their homeland in safety and dignity and freedom. It's also a reminder that Palestine is not free to take back its people, to welcome back its children who are scattered around the world. And so to end the ongoing Nakba, we have to dismantle those structures of settler colonialism that privilege one group of people over another, that deny a group of people their basic international legal rights and deny their ancestral ties to their land. It's not about partitioning. It's definitely not about expelling. It's about finding a way that we can all live together in Palestine in safety, dignity, and freedom. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Nassar, for those really beautiful words and for situating the Nakba and the ongoing Nakba within this context of settler colonialism, which I think is really so important for having the right framework and the right lens for understanding this issue, and also for de-exceptionalizing it, for enabling us to understand that this is just one of many manifestations of settler colonialism around the world. I do want to give a huge shout out to this book, Brothers Apart, which I have right here, and which we're going to drop a link to in the chat. Really urge you to get this book, read it. It's a very precious and wonderful account of Palestinians who remained in what became the state of Israel after the Nakba and what they went through. But I want to turn the mic over to Professor Pappé now.
Thank you, Josh. And it's a great pleasure to be with Congresswoman Rashida and Professor Nassar. And thank you for inviting me. You asked me to talk about some historical aspects of the Nakba, and of course that is really a very wide topic. So what I would like to do in the 10 minutes that I have, and I hope this would somehow fit the idea of historical aspects, I'm not sure, but anyway, I think this is what I would like to contribute. And of course, if we have time and people want to know more about what actually happened during the Nakba, we can discuss it later. But I would like to focus on the denial of the Nakba as an historical process. And I think that's very important. Otherwise, we don't understand why do we need a law that commemorates the Nakba. And it's quite incomprehensible and very difficult to accept that so many educated people, whether they are in politics, academia, media, or any other culture realm, are so ignorant about what happened. In many cases, it's not an intentional denial. Namely, they know what happened in 48, but they choose not to talk about it or to acknowledge it. In most cases, this is pure ignorance, despite the fact that the scholarly world and the activist world can provide them with ample information and sources if they would want to understand what happened in 1948. And I think the denial of the Nakba begins when the Nakba itself occurred in 1948. When Israel completed the ethnically cleansing half of Palestine's population and destroying half of its villages and most of its towns, the international community stood by and did not condemn the Israeli actions. This was still the very end of the age of colonialism, and Palestinians were not regarded as worthy of the Western world sympathy, while supporting the Zionist project absolved Europe from dealing profoundly with the Holocaust and its implications. Orientalism, Islamophobia, colonialism all played their part in the denial of the Nakba, both when it happened in the immediate years after it occurred. The crime committed against the Palestinian people was not reported, let alone condemned. The message to Israel was very clear. Ethnically cleansing the Palestinians will be tolerated by the West, and more importantly later, by the United States. The emergence of the Palestinian national movement, or the re-emergence rather, of the Palestinian national movement after 1948, and the beginning of a liberation struggle in the 1950s were quickly framed by the Israelis and the West as terrorism. Had the Nakba not been denied, the struggle would have been acknowledged as anti-colonial and a struggle by dispossessed people trying to redeem their homeland. But since there was no Nakba, a Palestinian armed struggle or any kind of struggle was unjustified and could only be defined as terrorism and motivated by anti-Semitism that was initiated by anti-Western forces. The culprit up to 1987 behind this supposedly terrorist Palestinian movement was the Soviet Union. After the end of the Cold War, it was Iran or political Islam. Within this international atmosphere, it was very easy for Israel to continue incremental ethnic cleansing between 1948 and 1967 inside Israel against the Palestinians who became citizens of Israel, targeting that particular population, and to pursue a more meaningful ethnic cleansing operation during the June 1967 war and the immediate years after it. In the long years of the occupations that started in 1967 of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, in various means, Israel continued to use the methods of ethnic cleansing that it had begun back in 1948. However, this method did not break down the Palestinian resilience and resistance, as we know, and therefore it was unfortunately only a matter of time before even more ruthless methods would be employed to impose Israel's vision of the future of historical Palestine on the Palestinians. A vision that at best allowed the Palestinians to remain under an apartheid regime and enclaved in mega prisons, and at worst, to become refugees outside the country. There's one reason for the continued denial of the Nakba in the mainstream academia, media, and politics in the West is indifference towards the project of the dispossession of the Palestinians. But there were two other important reasons. One is the realization over time that the Nakba is the key for understanding the persistence of violence in historical Palestine and the lack of significant progress in the so-called peace process. When the Nakba is accepted as the formative event that triggered the so-called conflict, the next step is to ask, why did the Nakba occur? And the unavoidable reply is that it was a direct implementation of the Zionist ideology, strategy, and planning. Such a realization would have required a very different Western attitude towards Israel and its policies. Indeed, it could have led to direct confrontation with the Jewish state, a confrontation the Western politicians are unwilling or afraid to be engaged in. The main reason for this fear is the perceived, and not necessarily real, power of the pro-Israeli lobby and its ability to destroy their political careers or their ties with the financial and industrial elites in their respective countries. The additional motive for the intentional denial of the Nakba is the apprehension that such a recognition will expose the Western, in particular the European, complicity in the crime committed against the Palestinians in 1948 and in the ongoing crime ever since 1948. This is why official Europe, as well as the American establishment, are fighting tooth and nail against what they and Israel call the context. Ever since the Secretary General of the United Nations condemned on October the 7th, 2023, the Hamas attack, but also commented that it was not done in a vacuum, namely it had a historical context, Israel and its European allies persecuted anyone who adopted this approach. And of course, Israel demanded that the Secretary General should be sacked. The relevant historical context that is necessary for understanding the events of the last 19 months goes back to the Nakba. The Gaza Strip was created by Israel during the Nakba as a mega refugee camp into which Israel pushed hundreds of thousands of Palestinians it expelled from the center and south of Palestine. The last wave that had been expelled in 1948 to the Gaza Strip were Palestinian villages on whose ruins some of the settlements that were attacked on the 7th of October were built. And indeed, the refugees from those places, with hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from other parts of historical Palestine, constitute 70% of the population of the Gaza Strip. The historical context also exposes the relevance of the scholarly definition of Zionism as settler colonialism, as was commented before, that had been first offered in the mid-1960s by Palestinian scholars and then rejuvenated by Australian and American scholars in the mid-1990s. Projects of settler colonialism are motivated by the logic of elimination of the native as the best way to ensure the success of their projects. The Zionist movement and the State of Israel later employed mainly ethnic cleansing as the best means to downsize the number of the native Palestinians. Therefore, remembering the 1948 Nakba is an important proof to the eliminatory impulse of the Zionist movement and later the State of Israel. There is a direct line between the success of expelling half of Palestine's population, or put differently, for the failure of the other half, and what we are witnessing today in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. The world, and in particular the West and the United Nations, failed in its duty to protect the Palestinians in 1948 and ever since. This duty is still sacred today, and we are witnessing the attempt by Israel to complete the 1948 Nakba through genocide in Gaza and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. Acknowledging the Nakba and fighting against its denial is one important step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Pappé, for that really excellent historical overview. And I'm really glad that you mentioned Nakba denialism, because actually, if you look at the text of Congresswoman Tlaib's resolution, you'll see that there is a reference to the denial of the Nakba and the condemnation of this denial. And that language was actually modeled on a similar resolution to commemorate the genocide that was committed against the people of Armenia, where also the denial of that genocide and that ethnic cleansing is something prevalent in the historical record too. So we see how oftentimes these acts of genocide are attempted to be covered up by the perpetrators. And I also want to plug one of Professor Pappé's many books. The one most relevant to our conversation today that he's written is The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. We will drop a link into the chat so you can get that book, which is also an incredibly important documentation of the Nakba. What I want to do right now is I want to turn to our three panelists and ask them each a question, give them about 3 minutes or so to answer, and then we'll go to some of your questions before we wrap up. And I want to start with Congresswoman Tlaib. You've been very outspoken and vocal about the fact that there's so much dehumanization of Palestinians and their narratives, especially on Capitol Hill and from your colleagues in particular. And I just wanted to ask you why do you think that is? Why do you think it is so difficult to get your colleagues to recognize the humanity of the Palestinian people?
Yeah, I think that racist tropes have been circling Capitol Hill for a while in regards to Palestinians. I've heard terminologies used of, well, it's not our fault. Their parents raised them to be X, Y, and Z, or Palestinians somehow are born to, they're savages. Or one Democratic colleague in caucus yelled, "They're all guilty." One on the floor is pretty much saying, "Kill them all." And there's no calling it out, condemning it, acknowledging that's what's happened. And people have heard me say this, but I feel like they've been conditioned that Palestinians are disposable, that they can't exist as human beings, that again, this is for and some actually believe this is the good thing to try to wipe them all because again, they claim they're inherently violent or all of these things. And so you're sitting there as a Palestinian kind of listening to these racist tropes many of them grew up with. Some of them are being told this. Even when I see tweets or social media posts from colleagues, I ask them, "What are you talking? This doesn't make any sense." They're children. And, and I know it's being fed to them. Racism is very bipartisan. It's not only Islamophobia, but it's anti-Arab. Growing up myself in the early 80s and throughout, all of that has been fueled with policy after policy, narratives after narratives here in Congress that has left, again, them looking the other way as a child starves to death in Gaza. These are the same colleagues that quote Human Rights Watch on other atrocities. Amnesty International, they'll quote them. But when it came to the Palestinian people and calling out the war crimes or the apartheid state, there was just a backlash of people. I think it's also really important to know, there's a lot of bullying and intimidation to many of my colleagues. I came in with the largest incoming class to Congress, some of the most amazing firsts. And one by one, many of them weren't here to come and work on what many refer to as foreign affairs issues. We're not familiar with, because some of them weren't meant to win, as some said to me, and so they hadn't been touched or reached out to or recruited, but they won because they're amazing advocates for their community and they're from their community and so forth. But I remember a colleague speaking out against Sheikh Jarrah and the illegal evictions of the Palestinian families there. And she just used the word eviction, and people just, she said, "Rashida, what did I do wrong?" I said, "Nothing. You're against homelessness," right? I mean, you refer to it as your own lived experience. You're referring to it like, well, you're against evictions. I mean, you're a person that is, but you can't apply it to Palestinians, right? When you apply it to Palestinians, it humanizes them. It applies a narrative that many Americans can understand. but that's what happens. She gets bullied, intimidated. She has not posted not once on the issue of Palestine since then. And so it silences people. They don't want to be seen as choosing a side, but I tell them, don't choose a side, choose a value, like choose your values, speak of your own lived experiences. But it's the aftermath of them doing what's right, and then getting bullied and intimidated. People get, and Josh, you saw it right after many of my colleagues voted to oppose the sanctions on the ICC. It was the second vote of this new Congress. Many of my colleagues in their own districts got text messages that were sent all throughout their district saying that your member of Congress supports, opened up our US soldiers to sanctions, which is inaccurate. But that shook them because a handful of them were new members. They were only in office for a month or so. And so I say all that is the dehumanization is real, and the people have been beat down to condition them not to see Palestinians as equal humans.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight into this really problematic dynamic that takes place on Capitol Hill, and for your perseverance in confronting it. I just can't imagine how difficult it is to have to prove to your colleagues your humanity. And thank you for all of your efforts to advance Palestinian rights on Capitol Hill. I want to turn to Professor Nassar. One of the things that's not so well known is that despite the widespread ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from their homes in 1948, some did remain in what became Israel, and that is the subject of your book. So can you just take a few minutes to walk us through the historical dynamics that were at play? What did these Palestinians confront living in this so-called Jewish state after most of their compatriots were expelled?
Sure. So we know about the 750,000 Palestinians who were expelled from their homes and lands in what became the state of Israel. We tend not to know as much about the 130,000 or so who remained, or who managed to return, who managed to sneak past the barbed wire and after they had been expelled and come back to their lands. So those who remained and those who returned, Israel realized by 1950-51 that it would be difficult for them to expel all the Palestinians. There was growing international pressure on them to do something with this indigenous minority, with this native minority. And so by 1953, they extended citizenship to those Palestinians who managed to remain or return in their homeland. But in order not to give them equal citizenship, they created a tier of belonging that's above citizenship. I think Israel is the only country in the world that's done this, where citizenship isn't your highest legal category of belonging, but your second highest. So in Israel, there's nationality, which is higher than citizenship. And so that has allowed from 1953 until today for Israel to claim that it's a democratic state that allows Palestinian citizens of Israel to live there, and has extended them some rights to vote and to be elected into office and so forth. But because of this higher level of category, Palestinian citizens of Israel actually don't have the same rights that Jewish Israelis have. There are over 60 laws that explicitly discriminate against Palestinian citizens of Israel, and it's created for them all sorts of more subtle ways in which the ongoing Nakba has played out. And again, I'll just give you one example. So I mentioned in my earlier comments the absentee property law, where the state could confiscate land that belonged to Palestinians by deeming them absentees. But a lot of Palestinians who were deemed absentee actually were still in the country. They were internally displaced, or they were internal refugees. And so they would, again, go to court with their documents and say, hey, we're still here. We're not absentees. We're still here. We'd like our land back. And Israel said no. Not only that, but internal absentees, actually, many of them didn't get citizenship when the citizenship law was extended. And so you had essentially not undocumented immigrants, but undocumented native people who then lived under the threat of expulsion for decades. Many people are familiar with Mahmoud Darwish, the famous Palestinian poet. He was one of these internally displaced peoples, and he talks about having been an elementary school student, 7, 8 years old, in elementary school as an undocumented Palestinian in Israel. And there would be school inspectors that would come and inspect the schools that were coming from the Israeli Ministry of Education. And so his principal hid him in a closet while the inspector came, because he knew, and Mahmoud knew, that if the inspector came, saw Mahmoud in class, saw that he was undocumented, he and his family would be expelled from Israel into Lebanon. So you can imagine the 7, 8-year-old boy hiding in his principal's closet in his office, hoping that he doesn't get discovered so that they could live in their ancestral homeland, right? So that's just one example of the ongoing Nakba and the ways in which it impacts not just those who are expelled from their lands, but those who remained within them. And finally, what it also reminds us of is that this is not an ancient conflict. This is not a conflict between ethnic or religious groups. This is a struggle for liberation against these structures that would deem little Mahmoud and his family to be foreigners, even as they've lived there for centuries. So this is what we mean when we say it's not a conflict or an ethnic conflict, but rather a struggle against settler colonialism and for the liberation of all.
Thank you so much, Professor Nassar, for that really great overview. And Professor Pappé, I want to take you up on your challenge to dig into the historical details that you offered a little while ago. One of the things that you do in your book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, is talk about Plan D, Plan Dalet, and the seminal role that this played in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Could you walk us through what this plan was and how it was actually implemented on the ground?
Yes, thank you, Josh. And I think it's very important to focus on the planning of the ethnic cleansing as much as describing the execution of the ethnic cleansing itself, because one of the prevailing myths still convincing a lot of people is that the Palestinians became refugees because the Arab world staged a war against Israel on the 15th of May 1948. And because of that war that was initiated by the Arab world, Palestinians became refugees. And of course, if you go into the historical analysis and you go to the period before any Arab soldier entered historical Palestine on the 15th of May 1948, you realize that already 250,000 Palestinians became refugees even before the Arab armies were ordered by their governments to try and salvage the Palestinians from the ethnic cleansing that already started in February 1948. And this is very important because it shows in many ways that rather than that the refugee problem became the result of the war was the means to make the Palestinian refugees. Now, one of the indications, the clear historical indications we have, that this ethnic cleansing was not a response to the Arab world attempt to salvage Palestine, but rather was the implementation of a settler colonial ideology that was based on the wish to eliminate the native population, is the plan that you mentioned, Plan D. Plan D was publicized on the 10th of March 1948. That is almost more than 2 months before the end of the British Mandate and before the so-called Arab-Israeli War of 1948 began. And it was a culmination of consultation between the leader of the Jewish community at the time, David Ben-Gurion, and a very small group of his advisors that already began to contemplate the fate of Palestine and the Palestinians a year before publishing Plan Dalet. That is from February 1947, when Britain announced its decision to end the mandate of Palestine. And the year of consultation gelled into the program of Plan D. Plan D actually was focusing on two objectives. One is to make sure that the future Jewish state takes over the mandatory state quickly, swiftly, and even before the mandatory state comes to an end. The second aim of Plan D was to advise the troops that will begin to take over historical Palestine. First, the state that was accorded to the Jews, to the Zionist movement by the United Nations, and later on the other parts of historical Palestine, what to do with the local population. And that is a very detailed instruction to the troops to occupy, to destroy, to expel, in a very graphic manner, one should say, when you look at the plan. But more importantly, the plan was translated into orders to the troops on the ground. And the orders themselves were quite explicit and directed not generally to the population, but to a specific village, a specific neighborhood, a specific town. And in most cases, it read in the same way, or was written in the same way. Occupation that should lead to the flight of the population. In case the population does not escape, does not flee, then it should be removed by force. And it states very clearly and should be transferred outside the boundaries of the country. And I think that when you look at this plan and you look at the orders that emanated from that plan, it is very difficult to deny the fact that the Palestinians became refugees because they were victims of a systematic, intentional master plan of ethnic cleansing that is a violation of international law, is a crime against humanity. And as we discussed this whole morning or afternoon, wherever everybody is, it's not just the crime itself that victimizes the Palestinians, but also the continued denial of the crime is like experiencing the crime twice rather than once. So more of this can, of course, be read in my book that you mentioned, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. But this is, in a nutshell, what Plan Dalet is all about.
Thank you so much, Professor Pappé. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to offer up a few questions from the audience that came in. One I'm going to address to Congresswoman Tlaib. There was a question about how poll after poll have shown that a majority of Americans want to see an end to weapons to Israel, especially as it contributes to this ongoing genocide that we're seeing inflicted on the Palestinian people in Gaza. The question was, are your colleagues aware of these polls? Do they understand this?
I'm actually writing my response right now to this person.
Wonderful.
Yes,
Ms.
P,
share.
we'll call her. So, yeah, I'm literally at my last sentence. Yeah, 7 out of 10 Democrats support an arms embargo. You know, congressional races, if you look at where, sorry, let me just finish the sentence to her, because many of which have lost certain races by a few thousand votes and so forth. And if you look, those are communities that have had large, you know, organizing efforts around against the genocide. I want people to know what rattles them the most, and maybe kind of puts it in their face that majority of Americans are now against, you know, arming this genocide, against this kind of blank check, you know, looking the other way of starvation, looking the other way in bombing hospitals and so forth, is that fellow Americans who do not share my faith or ethnicity are showing up at their town halls asking these questions. You know, hey, how come, you know, why are you doing this? Why are you supporting it? Now, for everyone listening, a lot of it has to also to do with this sheer number of dollars and funding. You know, I remember a colleague who did a town hall in rural Wisconsin told me this guy, you know, gets up, you know, a Caucasian gentleman, big farmer, gets up and he says, "What are y'all doing in Gaza?" You know, he said and everybody's like, yeah, he's like, why are we sending all that money to that guy? like there's this awareness among, again, people that are not named Rashida Tlaib or Maha Nassar or, Ilan. Like, they are people that have not all been connected or have lived experiences or have been, studying or learning or, again, living through this, that are now speaking up. I have to stress to all of you, one of the things that I've always said to people, I can't believe we always have money, to send to commit war crimes. We can't get money to have clean water for our kids. I mean, I have high schools in my district that we have to there's garbage bags over the fountains because the water is so contaminated. And so there is that element of it, but also I think people, it's about, Netanyahu. It's about the images. It's about some of the, actions by the government of Israel and so forth. And I think people and Americans are genuine, like, really just tired of it. In Michigan, I saw hundreds of thousands of people coming out saying we're very upset, and these are Democrats, right? Very upset, and I didn't realize that Michigan was so anti-war. It wasn't just about Palestine. It was this awareness of just like tired exhaustion of like more wars. And so I think that part of it is there. Just, I know your question is like, what? Why don't they see this? They do, or they ignore it. They won't poll it. That's why we have other people polling, bringing those elements to it. But their town halls are filled with people asking them that question. What I love is all the hands-off rally for everyone that's listening. Hands-off rallies are like, hands off our Medicaid, hands off our Social Security. There is not one that I have not gone to or seen online in other states that does not have a Palestinian flag or hands off Gaza. It is connected. And so it's incredible. They see the kafiyas and the hall with somebody that looks like Josh, not somebody that looks like me and Maha. I mean, they see it, that the encampments across the nation are being led by these incredibly courageous Jewish students who are like, not in our name, and they can't control it. But we're not going to go anywhere. If anything, it's growing. And just remember, and I know Josh, I know, but as a girl from Detroit, always reminding people that transformative change comes from us. This institution won't free Palestine. You all will. So from the outside in, push and advocate and speak truth.
Thank you so much for those inspiring words, Congresswoman. And I just wanted to highlight another one of your congressional initiatives that you've co-led with Congresswoman Jayapal to actually block the weapons that are going to Israel through joint resolutions of disapproval. So that's another way that people can get involved in that effort. And just before we close out, I want to direct one question to Professor Nassar and Professor Pappé together. There's a question about, and you mentioned the denialism of the Nakba amongst Israeli Jews. And the question is this denialism changing? And in a good or a bad way, as we hear Israeli politicians talking about how they want to see a second Nakba?
I mean, I think so. I see it on the college campuses. I see it in the polling. I see it on the streets. I went to our local May Day rally here in Tucson in southern Arizona. I was really struck by how many Palestinian flags and keffiyehs I saw from people, again, who don't look like me, who are coming to the realization that what they've been fed, what they've been told about Palestinians is just false. And it's often being led by young people, both here and around the world, and that gives me a great deal of hope and encouragement. And I don't see anything stopping them. I don't see anything stopping any of that. So in that sense, yes, I do see change.
I think the change definitely is there in the civil society, many sections. I don't know the scene in America too well, but I can say that at least in Europe, what is still surprising is the level of denial of the Nakba in the political elite, the mainstream media. and some section of the mainstream academia. And I have a feeling that this is true also to similar sections of the American society as a whole. One of the things I'm very much involved recently is giving expert witness testimonies to people who are being alleged in Europe, in left and right, of showing compassion for the Palestinians and are tried according to laws that are used against those who incite terrorism or anti-Semitism. And one of the feature I really kind of collected by doing so many of those in the last 19 months is the level of ignorance of the judges, for instance, of the Nakba. They don't know the term Nakba. Most of the judges in Europe don't know what Nakba means. They definitely don't know what happened in the Nakba. I talk with mainstream journalists. I'm not talking about alternative media or left media. They don't know what the Nakba is. It's incredible. 77 years, either the very effective lobbying or an intentional ignorance. In social sciences, we call it militant ignorance. Has created an unimaginable gap between what people in the street, so to speak, know about 1948, and those are supposed to be the more educated, most informed section of society know about it. And this is something we have to think about it, because it's very encouraging to see that the Nakba is acknowledged and fought against, and the denial is fought from below. But we don't have enough of it fighting from above in terms of political terms. And one of the things we should do in the universities, of course, is not only teach about the Nakba, we should also decide where do we teach about the Nakba. In Britain and in many universities in the United States, the Nakba, and with this I would end, I know we are out of time, the Nakba, if at all is referred to as a term, is brought as one possible political position of the Palestinians that is taught within political science or international relations department. If you would teach the Nakba in a department that deals with colonialism, genocide, and racism, you would not say that there are two sides to the Nakba. There are no two sides to the Holocaust. There are no two sides to the Holocaust of the African Americans, and therefore there is no two sides to the Nakba. There are not two versions of what happened in 1948. There's only one, and that is the one that is denied. And the denial affects so much the American so-called peace process, the immunity of Israel, the dehumanization of the Palestinians. And this is why with others, I founded a charity which is called the Nakba Memorial Foundation. I will put it in the chat in a minute. The Nakba Memorial Foundation, we are trying to fight the Nakba denial in Britain, but I'm sure there's a lot of other good individuals and institutions that are doing the same worldwide.
Thank you so much, Professor Pappé. And before we wrap up, I saw a lot of questions about whether we are recording this. We are. We're going to be posting it to social media later today. So please do share this with all of your friends to help educate them about the Nakba and about Congresswoman Tlaib's historic resolution. And just before we close out, we're going to drop a few more links. One is a policy memo that we've written that will help you talk about this congressional resolution with your member of Congress and why they need to support House Resolution 409. And we're also going to drop in a link one more time to the action alert where you can go and you can send an email to your representative to support this historic resolution to commemorate the Nakba and to end U.S. complicity in Israel's ongoing Nakba against the Palestinian people. With that, I want to close by thanking Professor Nassar, Professor Pappé, and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib for introducing this historic resolution and for being here with us today to shed their historical insight into this crucial issue. And thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.